Yeah, actually, can you explain that sort of thing a little bit further? Because I think a lot of people, they still hear the EPA, the word protections in their environment. It sort of sounds right. Okay, they must be nice people doing these things. As you said, there's now thousands and thousands of people that are part of this. But can you give me an example of what type of thing would be happening in Wyoming where, you know, someone is living their life as they see fit, whatever water rights they have or whatever other natural resource it is, and what the EPA would want to do, why they would claim they would want to do it, and then what happens when you get into a fight with them?
Well, I'll give you one example of a case that I handled up in northern Wyoming, and it was outside of Worland, where I was last week. I represented a landowner, and he moved an irrigation ditch on his property. And the EPA, and I know it was a test case, they came in and claimed that he violated the Clean Water Act by doing that because that irrigation ditch was a, quote, navigable water of the United States. It wasn't. It was an irrigation ditch. He had the right to maintain it and to move it and do what he did. It took us 6 years. They filed the enforcement action against him in 2008. We finally had a 2-week trial in 2014. I'm smart enough to know that you always get a jury trial when you're going up against the federal government for many reasons. But one is that that a lot of judges anymore are federal employees. I mean, they are federal employees, and they think of themselves that way. So I had a jury, and after a 2-week jury trial, they came back and ruled in my client's favor. He affected 2.1 acres on his own land in cleaning up what had been a terrible disaster. Actually, everybody had kind of abused that farm because it had been leased by absentee farmers for many years. He took out, he's an engineer, and so he designed a beautiful channel through there to make sure that the water could flow, reduce sedimentation, reduce any type of chemigation going into the Bighorn River and that sort of thing. At one point, by moving 2.1 acres, by affecting 2.1 acres on his own property, he was facing penalties of $65 million because the EPA claims that they can impose penalties at that time of $37,500 a day. That has now gone up to $59,000 a day if you violate the Clean Water Act. So what they do is they come into these farmers or ranchers and they say, you violated the Clean Water Act, you're facing penalties of $59,000 a day unless you do exactly what we tell you to do. Well, obviously 2 days you're dead broke. So nobody can fight back against them. And that's the thing, is that Congress never should have given that kind of authority to a bureaucracy, because giving a bureaucracy that kind of punishment authority, they turn into dictators. And that's what they've done. So right now I'm handling a lawsuit. I don't know if you remember when the EPA blew out the Gold King mine in southwestern Colorado and they turned the Animas River orange. It was in 2015. You can Google it. It was one of the worst environmental disasters in our country's history. And the EPA did it. So they went in and without my client's permission or knowledge, they built a water treatment facility on his property. They've operated it for 6.5 years and never paid him a dime in rent. It's an unconstitutional takings. That's the kind of abuse that the EPA visits upon our landowners every day. What the EPA is trying to do is they'd like to take control of all water resources in this country. Well, we know what happens when the federal government takes control of anything, especially when it is a resource such as water that is absolutely necessary for life. You know what happens. We're seeing it with medical care. They're saying, okay, you don't get the vaccine, we're going to take away your job. We're going to take away your unemployment. We're going to take away your medical care. That's exactly what they're moving on, and they have been moving on with water. This is no longer any kind of a conspiracy idea. This is truly what the federal government does. One of the most horrific things that happened in this country was Obamacare, because that's when the federal government decided that they could control our decision-making by controlling our access to health care. And look at what they've done to us in the last 2 years. They want to do the same thing with water.